I remember that morning like it was carved into my memory with a blunt knife, sharp, jagged, impossible to ignore. I had been walking near the edge of the city where an old tower, long abandoned and scheduled for demolition, still stood. The wind cut across the empty streets, carrying the scent of dust, concrete, and rusted metal. I had passed the tower countless times before, a crumbling relic that no one thought twice about. But that morning, something drew me closer. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just a mistake of habit. The sun was high, but the shadows of the skeletal tower stretched long across the cracked pavement. I remember the metal scaffolding leaning awkwardly against the side, a reminder of repairs left unfinished. Loose bricks littered the ground, crumbling with every careless step. I joked to myself about the dangers, laughing quietly into the wind, telling myself I was careful, that I wasn't reckless. But the world has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. I had barely stepped onto the dirt path that circled the tower when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible groan. It wasn't loud enough to startle, but it caught in my chest, a low vibration that seemed to travel through the ground into my feet. I froze, scanning the walls, my stomach tightening. Something felt off. A shiver ran up my spine as I noticed the shadows moving slightly, the scaffolding creaking in a rhythm that didn't match the wind. Then it happened. The ground beneath me vibrated sharply, like a distant earthquake. Dust erupted from the upper sections of the tower, clouds spilling down in slow motion. I tried to step back, tried to move, but the debris came faster than I expected. A section of brick and steel broke loose and slammed against the base of the tower, and the structure groaned as if it were alive, tilting, bowing, surrendering to gravity. I screamed. The sound was swallowed immediately by the roar of collapsing metal and shattering concrete. Dust filled the air, choking me, stinging my eyes. The noise was deafening, a crushing weight that seemed to bend reality. I stumbled backward, trying to find footing, but the ground shifted under my feet, and I fell. My hands scraped against jagged bricks and rusted metal. Pain shot through my left arm as I tried to shield myself from falling debris. Then the world went dark. I don't remember the first moment I was completely buried. 1 second I was scrambling over rubble, heart hammering, eyes streaming with dust. The next, it was silence. Crushing, suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional shift of stone above me. My body was pinned beneath tons of bricks, twisted metal, and wooden beams. My legs were trapped. My arms barely moved. A piece of beam pressed against my chest, making each breath a conscious, painful effort. I realized quickly that screaming for help wouldn't carry far. The debris absorbed sound like a sponge, muffling my voice. I tried anyway. "Help! Someone!" My words came out raw, rasping, barely audible even to myself. I coughed as dust filled my lungs. Panic began to claw at my mind. Every instinct screamed to move, to escape, to survive. But my body refused. I could feel blood trickling from a gash on my forehead. My hands were scraped and cut, and a sharp pain radiated down my ribs every time I tried to adjust my position. I was disoriented, trapped in a tight, confined space that seemed to have no exit. The air smelled of dust, concrete, and the metallic tang of my own blood. Every inhale burned, and every exhale felt like surrender. Time stretched immediately. 1 second became minutes, minutes became hours, or so it felt. I tried to calm myself. I had to think, to plan, to focus. Panicking would only make things worse. I began to feel around with my hands, probing for any gap in the debris that could give me leverage, anything I could move. Rocks and metal pressed against me from every direction. The space was so narrow that every movement caused pain, bruises, and sometimes sparks of fear that shot straight into my chest. I thought of calling someone, but my phone was crushed under debris. I had nothing. No one knew I was here. No one would come looking for hours, maybe even a full day. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. And in that moment, the real horror began. I understood, with bone-deep certainty, that I might not get out, that I could be trapped here for days. Hours stretched endlessly as I measured the small movements I could make. Dust settled into my lungs, my throat burned, and panic threatened to overtake me with every breath. But beneath it all, a strange, almost surreal calm started to creep in. The crushing weight above me, the darkness, the pain. It forced my mind to focus, to survive in ways I had never imagined. I whispered to myself over and over, I will get out. I have to get out. I'm still alive. The first part of my battle for survival had begun, and I had no idea how long it would last or what I would have to endure before I saw sunlight again. Darkness was immediate and complete. One moment, I was trying to shield myself from falling debris. The next, I was engulfed, pinned beneath the tower's shattered skeleton. My arms and legs twisted unnaturally beneath the weight of metal and brick, pain radiating through every joint. A beam pressed against my chest, making each breath a conscious struggle. I realized almost instantly that moving without careful calculation could worsen my injuries or trap me permanently. Every millimeter of motion carried a gamble between survival and collapse. The silence was oppressive, not peaceful, not comforting. It pressed against my ears like a living thing, heavy and almost tangible. My own voice sounded foreign when I shouted for help, rasping out a desperate, muffled sound that vanished into the dark labyrinth of rubble. No one could hear me. No one would come for hours, maybe longer. The realization of utter isolation clawed at my mind, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of calm I tried to cling to. I tried to move a small slab of concrete, one that pressed against my side. My fingers scrabbled against sharp edges, scraping skin raw, blood trickling into the dust beneath me. Pain shot up my arm and into my chest, but movement was necessary. Staying still meant suffocation, dehydration, or worse. I twisted carefully, inch by agonizing inch, until I found a tiny gap between two bricks. It wasn't enough to escape, but it was enough to shift slightly, relieving some of the crushing pressure. Every breath was a victory, every movement a small, hard-earned step towards survival. Time began to lose meaning. I had no way to track it. Minutes bled into hours, and I couldn't distinguish between day and night. The air was thin, dust-laden, and every inhalation burned my lungs. I coughed, hacking violently, tasting the tang of blood and concrete in my mouth. My throat felt raw. My chest ached from the effort to breathe. I realized then that oxygen was no longer abundant, and the longer I remained trapped, the more dangerous each inhalation would become. Panic surged again, clawing at my mind. I forced myself to stop and focus. I had to ration energy. I had to stay awake. I whispered to myself, repeating the same phrases over and over. You are alive. You are still alive. Keep moving. Keep breathing. The repetition became a lifeline, a way to anchor my mind to reality. Otherwise, I might have allowed despair to take hold entirely. I pressed my hands into the rubble above me, trying to test its stability. Every vibration from shifting debris caused sharp pain to spike across my limbs, but I needed to know whether the pile could move without collapsing further. My hands were scraped, bleeding, and raw, but I continued, ignoring the dull agony, because understanding my environment was the only way I could hope to survive. Hunger and thirst started to gnaw at me. I had no food, no water. My lips were cracked, my mouth dry, every swallow a challenge. I realized quickly that I couldn't waste energy crying or screaming endlessly. I had to conserve what little strength I had. The hours ahead were likely to be long, and without energy, without air, without hope, survival would become impossible. I thought about the world above me, the blue sky, the warmth of the sun, the smell of fresh air. For the first time, I understood how precious it was to feel the breeze on your skin, to hear ordinary sounds without distortion or muffling. I longed for it. I imagined it vividly, trying to anchor my mind in a memory of life before the collapse. It helped keep my mind sharp, gave me focus. I began systematically feeling my surroundings, metal beams, jagged edges, small voids between bricks. Each discovery was a potential escape route, or a trap. My body was screaming at me to stop, to rest, to succumb. But I could not. I reminded myself that giving up meant death. Survival meant thinking carefully, moving slowly, and exploiting every tiny advantage in my environment. Hours passed, or so I assumed. My arms grew numb. My legs tingled with pins and needles from lack of circulation. The beam pressing against my chest was unyielding, making each breath a conscious, calculated effort. I whispered encouragement to myself, an internal dialogue that kept panic at bay. I couldn't see beyond the debris, but my mind imagined the outside world, as if picturing it could somehow guide me toward it. Then came a faint sound, a distant scrape above me. My heart leapt. For a moment, hope flared like a torch in the darkness. Had someone noticed the collapse? Was help finally arriving? I shouted again, my voice hoarse, raw. The echo returned only as a whisper through stone and metal. Nothing. The sound had been too faint, too irregular to be reassurance. But it reminded me. I had to keep trying, keep moving, keep alert. Survival depended entirely on refusing to surrender. By the time exhaustion began to creep in, I had learned something vital. Even in the darkness, even pinned under tons of debris, there were opportunities. Tiny shifts could relieve pressure, careful probing could identify weak points, and hope, though fragile, was essential. I began to pace my mind, if not my body, constructing mental plans for escape. I imagined the rubble above me moving, visualized myself crawling through gaps. It was all I had, the slow, deliberate exercise of will. And as the hours stretched on, I realized the fight had only begun. Darkness arrived long before I could see it. Trapped beneath the collapsed tower, the sun's warmth and light never reached me. Shadows stretched impossibly in the cramped space, folding over brick, metal, and my own body. My eyes adjusted to nothing. All I could see were the faint impressions of debris pressed tightly against me, shapes that merged with my imagination. The air had grown thinner, heavier, harder to draw in. Every breath burned my lungs and throat, and each one seemed increasingly precious. The weight above me shifted slightly. Not dangerously, at least not yet, but enough that I had to brace with my legs and shoulders to prevent being crushed further. I realized my body was growing weaker. Fatigue was setting in faster than I expected. My muscles trembled from exertion. My hands ached from scraping against sharp edges, and the raw skin of my fingers stung whenever I tried to grasp something. Panic nipped at the edges of my mind, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, in order to conserve what energy I had left. I tried calling out for help again, my voice hoarse, barely carrying beyond the thick wall of concrete and metal. My words sounded alien to me, like someone else's voice trapped inside my own throat. "Help!" I shouted. "Please! Anyone! Help!" Each cry drained my lungs and throat further, but remaining silent felt worse. Even if no one could hear me, the act of calling out helped stave off complete despair. Time became a fluid, meaningless thing. Without sunlight, without clocks, without any reference points, I lost all sense of hours versus minutes. I didn't know if I had been trapped for 1 hour or 10. My own body became a puzzle I had to decipher. Aching arms, throbbing head, numb legs, a chest that burned with effort. Every sensation was amplified in the silence, every pain and throb a warning. Dehydration began to creep in, subtle at first, then insistent. My lips cracked, my tongue felt like sandpaper against my teeth. My mouth was dry no matter how much I licked it, and my stomach gurgled with emptiness that made my head spin. I hadn't thought survival could feel like this. Not a grand, heroic fight, but a series of tiny, grinding calculations. Move carefully. Conserve energy. Don't panic. Don't waste oxygen. Each instruction was a mantra, repeated like a lifeline. Hours passed in a haze. The cramped, suffocating space started to play tricks on my mind. Shadows formed shapes that weren't there. Sounds echoed in impossible directions, and at times I swore I could hear whispers, soft, taunting, or maybe coaxing me to give in. My brain, exhausted and starving for stimuli, began creating hallucinations, a hand reaching for me from above, a distant voice calling my name, the faint glimmer of daylight that disappeared when I tried to focus on it. Each illusion was vivid enough to make my heart leap and falter simultaneously. Sleep became impossible, yet increasingly necessary. My body trembled from exhaustion, but closing my eyes felt dangerous. The moment I drifted even briefly into unconsciousness, I feared I wouldn't wake again. My mind teetered between panic and surrender, between rational calculation and the kind of irrational fear that lurks in dreams. I whispered encouragement to myself, each phrase a rope tied around my sanity. "You're still alive. You will get out. Focus on breathing. Focus on movement." Pain, too, grew sharper as nerves went on fire from the crush and contortions. My left leg had gone numb, a heavy, cold weight I couldn't shift easily. Every attempt to wriggle brought a spike of agony, forcing me to retreat and plan my movements meticulously. Even small shifts, tiny inch-long adjustments, could be the difference between being able to move at all or causing a crushing collapse. And still, I persisted. Despite hunger, thirst, fear, and injury, my mind clung to hope. I visualized myself outside, sunlight on my face, air filling my lungs freely, the warm breeze of freedom brushing against my skin. It wasn't mere fantasy, it was a strategy. Clinging to that mental image provided focus, a fragile bridge between despair and survival. As night deepened, the silence became almost tactile. It pressed against me, urging surrender, whispering that no one would come, that this was the end. I realized in that moment that surviving wouldn't just require strength. It would require a refusal to give up, a stubbornness to fight in a place that offered no visible escape. My body was trapped, yes, but my mind was still mine, and I resolved to keep it that way, no matter how long it took. The darkness stretched endlessly, filled with crushing weight, silence, and hallucinations that toyed with my sanity. Every moment became a test, a calculation, a fight against both the debris pressing down and the creeping surrender in my mind. I had no idea if morning would ever come, or if anyone would ever find me. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of determination persisted, fragile but unyielding. The hours bled together, a continuous blur of darkness, pain, and isolation. My body was screaming, every muscle, joint, and nerve a reminder of how fragile life could be. My chest burned with each breath, every inhalation a laborious task. My hands and arms throbbed from constant pressure against jagged debris. My legs were numb, a cold, heavy weight that refused to move. Hunger and thirst gnawed at me relentlessly. My mouth was raw, my tongue dry, and even the smallest swallow of saliva felt like a luxury I could barely summon. Panic became a constant companion. At first, I could fight it with repetition, with whispered mantras. I am alive. I will survive. Move carefully. Keep breathing. But as the hours stretched, the words became thinner, weaker. My mind began to wander into dangerous territory. Shadows in the debris morphed into faces, shapes of hands, faint glimpses of figures hovering just out of reach. Each hallucination sent a jolt through my body, making me shiver despite the oppressive warmth of the confined space. The darkness was no longer passive. It pressed against me, an entity with weight and intent. Every sound, a shifting brick, a small drop of debris, echoed in my skull, magnified and distorted. I began to imagine voices, soft and coaxing, whispering that it was time to stop struggling, to let go. I fought against the pull, clinging to reality by the thinnest of threads. My body begged for rest, for surrender, but my mind had to resist. Thirst became unbearable. My tongue felt swollen, dry as sandpaper. My lips cracked, bleeding into the dust around me. My stomach twisted, gnawing and aching, reminding me with every pulse of hunger I could not satisfy. Each sip of imagined water became a fleeting vision in my mind, a cold, refreshing river slipping just out of reach. I forced myself to breathe slowly, conserving what little energy remained. Every motion had to be calculated, every thought deliberate. One wrong move could crush me further. I began to feel detached from my body, as though I were observing it from a distance. Pain existed, yes, but it was filtered through a haze of exhaustion and dehydration. My hands moved without thought, probing gaps in the debris, testing spaces that might allow me to shift. Every attempt brought a flash of agony. Every movement became a risk of worsening injury or collapse. And yet, I continued. Survival was no longer instinct. It was a deliberate choice, repeated moment by moment. Time had lost all meaning. I could not tell if the sky outside had changed, if night had passed, or if the sun would ever return. My mind replayed memories, fragments of a life beyond the rubble, sunlight on my face, laughter, the smell of rain on concrete, the feel of a breeze. Each memory was a lifeline, a fragile tether to the world I had almost left behind. Hallucinations intensified. I saw shapes moving in the dust above me, flickers of light where none existed, shadows that stretched impossibly far. At times, I thought I heard voices, not the reassuring kind, but distant, distorted, taunting whispers. My breathing quickened, panic threatening to consume me, yet I forced my mind to focus, clinging to the mantra that had sustained me. I am alive. I must survive. Breathe, move, observe. Dehydration made thinking harder. I could feel my mind fraying at the edges. Thoughts tangled, words repeated, and small decisions became monumental. I realized that survival would require more than physical strength. It would demand an unrelenting will to endure, a refusal to surrender to the darkness that pressed in from every side. My body weakened further. Pain became dull in some areas, sharp in others. My movements slowed, careful and deliberate, as though each inch of progress had to be negotiated with the debris itself. I realized with stark clarity that if I could not summon help or create an escape, I might not last another day. The thought of dying trapped beneath the tower, silent, unseen, consumed me. And yet, amid the terror, a small ember of determination persisted, a thought that refused to extinguish. I will see sunlight again. I will breathe free air. I will survive. I whispered it over and over, into the darkness, into the debris, into my own ears. I will survive. It was fragile, but it was enough. Hours, or maybe days, passed. I could no longer tell. Time had become meaningless beneath the weight of the tower. The air grew thinner with every shallow breath, and my body felt simultaneously heavy and unreal. My limbs throbbed with pain, yet at times I barely felt them. Hunger and dehydration gnawed at me, making my mind reel with confusion. Every sound, every vibration through the debris felt amplified, ominous, and unnatural. The hallucinations started small, almost polite, a flicker of light, the sense of movement where there was none. But soon, they became intrusive, demanding my attention. I could see faces formed from brick and dust, staring at me with empty eyes. Shadows crawled across the walls, stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. Faint whispers echoed through the tight confines, sometimes encouraging, sometimes mocking. They spoke in tones I could almost understand, yet never clearly. My heart raced uncontrollably. My breathing grew shallow. I tried to speak. My words were swallowed immediately by the debris around me. "Help! Help!" I cried. My own voice startled me, fragile and distant. I could not tell if it was real or a trick of the mind. Every scream drained what little energy I had left. My chest ached from the effort to inhale. The beam pressing against me above seemed heavier with each movement, as if sensing my exhaustion. Dehydration had begun to warp my perception. I imagined water trickling through cracks in the rubble, tasting it on my tongue, only to find nothing. I imagined sunlight piercing the debris, warming my skin, filling my lungs with air I could not breathe. My body yearned for it. My mind clung to it, but reality offered only darkness and the suffocating weight above. I began to hallucinate conversations with people I loved, voices from the past calling to me, urging me to surrender. They were not real. I knew it, and yet their familiarity was intoxicating. A part of me almost wanted to give in, to drift into the calm that whispered of relief from the pain. I fought against it, but the effort was exhausting. Every rational thought had to be wrestled from the grip of hallucination and fear. The pain in my body became secondary to the terror in my mind. My legs were numb, pins and needles stabbing every few seconds. My arms trembled, raw from scraping against jagged concrete. My chest burned with each breath, shallow and strained. Yet the mind can be crueler than the body. The hallucinations were relentless. Shadows morphed into hands reaching for me. Voices whispered that no one would ever find me, that I would rot here unseen. In my delirium, I could almost believe it. It was a quiet, seductive thought. Surrender, drift, let go. relief from the pain, from the hunger, from the exhaustion. My body wanted it. My mind was tempted. But a deeper instinct buried beneath fear and hallucination clung stubbornly to life. I reminded myself of reality, of the faint chance that someone might come, of the hope of seeing the sky again. I forced myself to move. Every shift was painstaking, every inch a battle against both gravity and my own body. My hands found gaps, small spaces I could wiggle into, creating the tiniest leverage. Each small movement was a victory, a reminder that survival required willpower as much as strength. I whispered repeatedly, "I am alive. I will survive. I will survive." Then I felt something change. The hallucinations did not stop, but the ember of hope flared. I realized that surrendering mentally was as dangerous as physically giving up. I had to cling to reality, however distorted it had become, and focus on small, achievable goals. Wiggle an inch, shift a beam, find a space to breathe more freely. Every conscious action became a lifeline. At that moment, trapped and hallucinating, I understood the raw fragility of life. My body could fail, my mind could betray me, and yet survival depended entirely on refusing to surrender, on clinging to the smallest fragments of hope, on continuing to fight when every fiber of existence screamed otherwise. The darkness pressed closer, suffocating. My mind began to waver between despair and determination. But deep inside, buried under terror, pain, and hallucination, I realized I still wanted to live. The fight was no longer just for escape. It was for life itself. And somewhere in that suffocating, crushing void, I decided I would not let go. The faint vibrations began long before I could see or hear anything. At first, I thought it was the shifting debris above me, responding to my movements. But then came a sound unmistakably human. Voices, distant, muffled, but alive. My heart leapt. I had almost stopped hoping anyone would find me, yet here was proof that the outside world still existed. "Over here, can you hear us?" a voice called. My voice cracked as I tried to answer, hoarse and weak, but it reached them. Relief surged through me, sharp and overwhelming, mixed with disbelief. I was alive. Someone had found me. I shouted again, louder this time, a raw, rasping sound that tore my throat but carried through the debris. "Yes, I'm here. Please help me." Each word felt like a miracle. They responded immediately, guiding me with instructions I could barely comprehend through the cacophony of my own heartbeat, my labored breaths, and the shifting rubble around me. The vibrations increased as they worked above, carefully moving beams and lifting debris. Every shift reverberated through my pinned body, sending shivers of both pain and hope. I tried to brace myself, twisting slightly to avoid further injury, feeling the weight above me lessen fractionally with each careful movement. It was slow, painfully slow, but I could feel life returning to the space around me. The sound of tools, the careful scraping of rescuers, the occasional exclamation of effort. They found a small opening near my side, just enough to pass through a water bottle and a warm blanket. Tears pricked my eyes as I clutched the blanket to my face, inhaling the faint, human scent of help. My throat burned, dry and raw, but the sensation of being tended to, of being noticed, of being alive in the presence of others, was almost unbearable in its intensity. I had been alone for what felt like an eternity, and now I was tethered to the world again. Every movement required instruction. Slowly, shift to your left arm. That's it. Hold still. Don't push too hard. The rescuers' voices were calm, steady, guiding me through each excruciating step. My muscles, weakened and stiff from days of compression, obeyed with difficulty. I gritted my teeth against the pain as they worked, each inch forward a victory, each shift an affirmation of life. Water reached my lips first. I drank greedily, the cool liquid burning through the dryness of my mouth and throat. It was more than sustenance. It was proof that I was still alive. The blanket wrapped around my shoulders brought warmth that I didn't realize I had been craving. Every sensation, every small comfort, reminded me that I had survived something unimaginable. The next phase was the hardest. They had to widen the gap enough to extract me safely. My arms and legs were trapped, my chest still pressed by a stubborn beam. Every movement sent sharp pain radiating through my body. I couldn't stop trembling, partly from exhaustion, partly from adrenaline, partly from relief. Yet with each careful instruction, with each cautious shift, I moved closer to freedom. Then came the moment I felt the air fully, the first breath of uncompressed oxygen in what felt like an eternity. My chest expanded without effort. My limbs could stretch. My ears rang with sound, voices, wind, life beyond the debris. I was almost free. Finally, they lifted me through the final gap. Sunlight, or rather daylight, hit my face, blinding and beautiful. I could hear the distant city, the sound of wind, and most importantly, the voices of people who had come to bring me back. I collapsed onto solid ground, every muscle shaking uncontrollably. Blankets were wrapped around me again, hands held me steady, and I wept, not quietly, but in uncontrolled sobs of relief, pain, and disbelief. I was alive. After hours, maybe days, trapped under tons of debris, bruised, battered, dehydrated, and exhausted, I had made it. And the surreal thing was that my body, which had been pinned, broken, and fighting for air, now felt weightless with relief. The rescue team was calm, efficient, and patient, pulling me from the debris while checking vitals, administering fluids, and offering reassurance. As I lay there on the ground, wrapped in warmth, drinking water, blinking into the unfamiliar light, I realized something I had not felt for days: hope. Real, tangible hope. I had survived what should have ended me, and the world outside, the sun, the breeze, the voices, welcomed me back with a quiet intensity I could never forget. But even in relief, a shadow lingered. The experience had carved something permanent into my mind. I understood, more clearly than ever, the fragility of life. How close I had come to being nothing more than dust and echoes beneath that fallen tower. And how every choice, every small action, every ounce of stubborn will had mattered in the fight for survival. Even after I was pulled from the debris, wrapped in blankets, and tended to by the rescue team, the experience didn't feel over. My body ached in ways I hadn't known possible. Every joint throbbed, every muscle protested. Cuts and bruises covered my arms and legs, and my head still throbbed from impact. But the physical pain, as intense as it was, paled in comparison to the mental and emotional aftermath. Sleep became strange and elusive. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I was trapped again, convinced that the tower had collapsed a second time. Dreams blurred with memory, shadows in the room taking shapes of debris, voices calling from nowhere. The line between what had happened and what my mind created became nearly impossible to distinguish. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the walls made my heart race. Even in daylight, ordinary tasks carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. Walking past construction sites made my stomach twist. Any sound of falling debris, any distant hammering, sent me spinning into panic. I realized that the trauma had altered my perception of the world. Life, I understood now with painful clarity, could end in a single, unpredictable moment. The fragility of existence was no longer abstract. It was real, palpable, and ever-present. Yet alongside the fear and trauma, there was gratitude. A deep, almost overwhelming sense of appreciation for every breath I could take, every movement I could make, every ordinary moment I had once taken for granted. The simple act of standing, stretching, or drinking a glass of water became miracles in my mind. I had faced death in its quiet, crushing form, and I had survived. I thought often about the rescuers, the voices that reached me when I was pinned beneath that tower. If they had arrived even minutes later, if my initial movements had been slightly different, I might not have made it. Gratitude, humility, and reverence for life became part of my daily consciousness. Survival had not been a solitary act. It had required luck, timing, and the presence of people willing to reach into the darkness to bring me back. The psychological effects lingered. I found myself replaying the hallucinations and whispers in my mind, analyzing every detail. Were they real? Were they products of exhaustion and dehydration? Did they carry some message about resilience, survival, or instinct? I may never know. What I do know is that facing the edge of existence, feeling the seduction of surrender, the isolation of being buried beneath rubble, changed me permanently. I also realized that the experience had given me a strange, newfound strength. I could endure discomfort, exhaustion, and fear in ways I had never imagined. My mental limits had been tested, my will refined, and my perspective shifted. I knew now that survival is as much about mindset as it is about physical ability. The choice to fight, to cling to hope, even when everything seems lost, can mean the difference between life and death. And so I share this story, not just as a personal account, but as a caution and a lesson. Life is fragile. Danger can strike unexpectedly. Ordinary environments, a tower, a construction site, a familiar space, can turn deadly in seconds. Preparation, awareness, and respect for one's surroundings are vital. But even more crucial is the decision to refuse surrender, to fight when the body and mind are exhausted, when hope feels like it has abandoned you. I think often about that space beneath the tower, the silence, the weight, the hallucinations, the terrifying stillness. And I remember the choice I made, to survive, to move, to breathe, to hope. That choice carried me from darkness into daylight, from despair to life. Today, I live differently. I notice details others overlook. I take nothing for granted. I approach life with both caution and appreciation, aware that a single moment can alter everything. And I carry with me the memory of the tower, the weight above, the whispered hallucinations, and the relentless, stubborn will to live. Because life, I have learned, is the most precious thing we have. And sometimes surviving isn't about strength or skill. It's about refusing to give up, even when every part of you is screaming that it's over.